Let's jump right in. You obviously cover the world in your job as president of NDI, but you also bring a particular expertise on Asia, serving as ambassador to Burma. How do you see Asia these days when it comes to freedom and threats to freedom? We see China's role on the world stage continuing to increase, threatening democracy in places like Hong Kong. North Korea remains a problem. The junta, of course, in Burma. How do you see Asia on these issues?
I see Asia like almost any other part of the world right now. Years ago, when I first worked at NDI in the 1990s, there was so-called Asian values. There was Lee Kuan Yew versus Kim Dae-jung, as those who may remember this. And Lee Kuan Yew talked about Asian values are inimitable, are not consistent with democracy. And Kim Dae-jung said, "Bull, we want a voice, we want dignity and rights like anyone else." And Kim Dae-jung not only succeeded and was victorious in that argument, but he became president of South Korea. And we saw a wave of democratic movements and democratic change in Asia, and we're now seeing some regression. When I was ambassador in Myanmar, we saw some progress there. That was very nascent kind of progress toward democracy, but some progress. But you see the people of Myanmar, the people of Thailand, the people of Cambodia, the people of Hong Kong, all very strongly striving for their democratic rights, regardless of those who are opposing them, who are attacking their democracy and seeking power for themselves. And then stronger and stronger democracies, some of the strongest really in the world, in places like Taiwan or Japan and even Korea, though they've had some problems of late, they've strengthened their democracies. So I think in Asia, there's a great deal of hope that the passions and the will of populations throughout the region will win out eventually, even in the face of what we're seeing all over the world, which is headwinds and regression by old style autocrats.
Given that you were ambassador in Myanmar, I want to drill a little deeper there and ask you, you were there at arguably better times. What happened? What went wrong? And then how should democracy activists view the situation, and what hope do they have there?
It's a terrible, terrible, terrible situation. And it gives me heartburn. It gives me no end of it's difficult to even look at my time there when things were more hopeful and open. It's just a different country, and it's not just regressed to where it was before 2011, but in some ways even worse, in the sense of how degraded the situation. It is really a civil war. The entire country is in revolt against the military, and in that way, it is hopeful in a strange way, despite all the violence, despite all the degradation. And it's degradation of the economy, degradation of society. There's also a unity of purpose between the ethnic majority Bamar and the ethnic minority nationalities that have traditionally fought each other. They are now united against the military, and united in a way that we haven't seen. Even the Rohingya, who are not even considered a nationality in the country, they are now sympathized with because they realized just what the military had done to them and how much the population had been lied to. The trauma in the country is deep. It was deep when I was there. Reconciliation among the different ethnicities is a long-standing problem and will take a long time to heal and to get to a better place. Is there hope? It's hard to see. I just hate to say, I don't think anybody has a silver bullet. There's no easy way out of the current predicament. This military is like the military there has always been, which is covetous of their power, deluded in their own position in Myanmar, and unwilling to admit when they've made a mistake. And when they do make a mistake, they simply rally around the institution rather than rally around the country. And they're willing to destroy the country to save themselves, it seems. So they do not control the country. The people have decided that they're going to fight back with whatever they've got to the end. There was a younger generation who have said, no, you've messed with the wrong generation. We're not going back to the way it was with our parents and grandparents. So there's something to work with there. We have to stay true to them. We cannot give up on them. We cannot forget them. All this attention on Ukraine, we cannot forget the struggles of Myanmar, which is in some ways a domestic version of what's happening in Ukraine. Whether there's room for optimism in the short term, it's difficult, but we have to keep fighting for them and make sure they feel they are not isolated.
maybe expand that a little bit towards what you were saying at the end, thinking about Asia, but also beyond. How do the Alliance of Democracies best help more nations transition to democracy or resist authoritarian forces that are ruling over them currently?
Well, there are a number of different factors in that. One is just simply the transition from authoritarian governments or a coup, military dictatorship, to something different. And that just it means we have to work with our partners and in common purpose. And that means the Japanese, who are maybe in a different place than we are in Myanmar, make sure they understand what's at stake here, why democracy matters, why this stuff is essential to our national security, that a failed state, in this instance, in the heart of Asia, is not in the interest of any of us. So I think we stay true to the opposition. We give them support. We show there's some solidarity. We ensure diplomatic isolation of the illiberal, of the autocratic leadership, and we just keep that pressure on and make sure that we don't have weak links that can undermine that solidarity that these autocrats can feel solace from. But that's only one stage, I should say. That's a transition. That's sort of the traditional way of thinking of democracy, just transitioning it from an authoritarian moment to this new, hopeful, optimistic moment. Transitions to democracy are long-term. And I think what we need to also be thinking about, as in the case of Myanmar, is when that change happens, that we really invest in it. And that we recognize that this is going to be a long-term effort, that it's not going to be linear, that there'll be steps back, that that we need to put extra investment in, and also tell the people of the country that this is hard. Democracy is not easy. And it's not a single event, it's not a single election, it's not a single moment of change where the bad guys leave and you take over. Then democracy has to deliver, democracy has to sustain, it has to be institutionalized. And that's where real transition happens. And that's where I think the United States and our partners have to be thinking strategically about how do we invest after that initial transition to long-term sustainment, so that they can be models for others in other countries. So they look at it and go, that's the way we want to go. And the more, you get models of where it's not where we want to go, where democracy doesn't deliver and there's regression, then folks the small d Democrats lose a little bit of hope. They get a little bit deflated, and the autocrats get inflated, and they point at it and say, that's the future. Like China likes to say, we can give you stability, we can deliver for you, in a very false promise.
As the United States or its community of democratic allies are considering where they offer their support, what conditions do you think are necessary on the ground to help best support a country that's transitioning?
Conditions on the ground for a transition, you need leadership. Is number one. You need folks in the elite sectors from across the, and that's of course the security sector, but also political sector and economic sector, that are committed to rules, committed to a process, committed to a common vision. If they're simply looking at this as maybe new rules but same game, okay, this is just another way to gain power and sustain that power without responsibility, without turning that power over to the people to decide and be held account, to hold the governments to account. You're not going to get real change. You're just going to get cosmetic electoral, changes, but really not democracy, not embedded, institutionalized democracy. So you need that leadership, you need that commitment, you need the civic empowerment, you need civic education, because ultimately it's up to citizens to own the democracy, to defend the democracy, not just to vote, but to engage and hold their leaders accountable if they don't rise to their expectations. So there are a lot of conditions, and I think ultimately it has to be a culture. They have to create a culture of compromise, a culture of communication, a culture of losing in order to win later, of recognizing you're not going to win every battle. And every battle is not a war. I think that mindset change happens much more slowly than, say, an election. You can have an election tomorrow, but to have a culture change, changes of power and consultation you have communication, that takes longer.
One last question for me, and I think there's a lot of bad news in the world today, and we're looking for something to feel good about. Is there a country, or are there countries that you could point to where there's a success story that we can observe and learn from?
Look, I mean, the number one issue I think we're all looking at with awe is Ukraine. I mean, the democracy really does matter. That they are fighting for their freedom. They are fighting tooth and nail. Even those who were considered, and this happened the same in Myanmar, where the poll numbers suggested, well, they're divided. They don't really care about democracy. They're souring on democracy because there's still corruption and it's not really delivering for them. Well, once you take away those rights, once the military in Myanmar effected a coup, people united across political views to say, we reject this, return to autocracy. The same in Ukraine. There was sort of this malaise, well, maybe, democracy isn't as, because of the corruption, and it's a kind of a faulty democracy. Well, the moment it was put under siege or it was under threat, the people rose up and are now defending it with everything they've got. I get hope in the young people of Hong Kong, the young people of Thailand. I get hope from the young people and the women of Sudan. You see it all over the world. People who are speaking up. And, we hear a lot about the 16 years of regression in democracy. But what gets not as much headlines, and the same surveys that say that actually political participation has risen in the last 16 years, led by young people and women and more marginalized, who want a voice, who are demanding a voice. And there is where we have the opportunity. We need to channel that energy, channel that demand, channel that desire, not for less democracy. No one's clamoring for autocracy out there. They want better democracy. And what our responsibility is to meet that demand and to invest in those people and show them a better way, or a way of channeling that energy and ensuring these countries move in a better direction. So I'm encouraged by a lot of what I see around the world in terms of the energy, but it's also a challenge. If we don't meet the moment, and we don't show solidarity and invest in this possibility, you're going to get more frustration and likely more regression.
So Derek, let me squeeze in one last question. And you talked about the rise in participation in the process. And we've seen that here in the United States recently with increasing turnout for our elections. But of course, here in the United States, we have had a whole slew of problems, not least January 6th of last year and others. How do you deal with those countries that we look at, possibly criticize, and they throw whataboutism back in our face, and they say, right, well, who are you guys to criticize us, to tell us what is wrong in our countries when you have so many problems yourselves?
Well, I say, first of all, you are right that American democracy has challenges, and that we have been weakened by lack of civic engagement, by January 6th and the inability to accept electoral results, by the violation of certain norms and rules of democracies that has occurred, and the polarization that has happened as a result of events of the last many years. So you are right to criticize or be concerned about what's happening in America, and we understand that. But we're not lecturing you about American democracy. What we're about is, first of all, with confidence, knowing that the weakness of our democracy makes America weaker. And we have been strongest when we have been united, and when our democracy has been strong. It is our national security. Our democracy is our national security. And what we bring as NDI is really, we're responding to demand overseas. Most folks don't raise our issues. Maybe elites will raise the issues, or leaders will play the whataboutism. Right. The people don't. The people say, yeah, we're concerned about that because we want to believe in you. We need a model out there. We want to believe in something. We liked when we had America as a model, and you're not really a model as much anymore, but we want your help. We want to feel that solidarity. We want to feel that support because we, like you, believe that democracy is the best system, and we want to strengthen our democracies. And they're not waiting for America to get its democracy right in order to try to gain their own rights and make their own societies more secure. And I think, NDI is not simply an American organization. Most of our people around the world are non-Americans. But what we bring is basically the soul of America, which is democracy. And we're trying to share the experiences of small d Democrats from around the world so that others can realize for themselves what we have always strove ourselves to realize, the aspirations that are part of our founding, that others now are, a part of their dream, and in the hope maybe that they can inspire us. I think for years we have been the inspiration for others. I think, again, there is some of that still going on, but I think we can be inspired by how much people are putting on the line for their own rights and their own democracies. In that way, we can maybe remember why this matters and stop being so complacent and fight for our democracy the way they are fighting for theirs.
Great. Derek, a terrific note to end on. We really appreciate it. Derek Mitchell, president of the National Democratic Institute. Thanks so much for taking the time to join us.